Odysseus and the Ghosts. The north winds blew as Circe had foretold, and it sped us on our way toward the land of perpetual night. The sun was low in the sky by the time we reached the mouth of the river Ocean, and it set behind us as we sailed upriver. I have no idea how long it took us. All sense of time had disappeared, but eventually the river dwindled to a stream, and we hauled our ship out of the water onto a narrow strip of the beach. Peering through the gloom, we could make out the groves of blighted willows and tall black poplars that belonged to Persephone, daughter of Zeus and queen of death. We took the 2 sheep and made our way through the grove beside the tiny stream that the river Ocean had become, until we reached its source right at the entrance to the underworld. We stopped here, and my men dug a trench like a grave, while we prayed for all my dead comrades. Then, while my companions held the ram and the black ewe over the trench, I took out my knife and slit the animals' throats. Their blood gushed out, first in great spurts and then in a steady stream that poured into the grave-like hole. The spirits of the dead immediately appeared at the entrance to the underworld and crowded, jostling and screeching, toward the trench, drawn by the scent of blood. I pulled out my bright sword and rushed toward them, waving it around my head. Although I could not harm them, for how can you hurt a ghost? They were clearly dismayed by the sight of me and drew back in terror. Then, while I held off the uniquest spirits of the night, my companions skinned the dead sheep and burned them, praying over the smoke and flames to Hades and Persephone. While my men prayed, I sat with my sword held out over the blood-filled trench. Now the spirits grew still and approached me one by one. The first to come forward was my mother, Antilochia. When I saw her, the blood drained from my face. My heart stopped. 12 years before, I had left her happy and well in the full bloom of middle age, and now she was dead. I felt a sharp pang of fear. What about Penelope, my wife, and Telemachus, my son? Were they dead too? Had some disaster struck my home? I longed to embrace my mother and question her, but to my dismay she looked straight through me without a flicker of recognition. I waved her away in spite of my tears, and I watched her melt back into the shapeless mass of dead souls. As my mother withdrew, another ghost approached me. It was a blind old man with a golden staff who stopped in front of me. "Cunning Odysseus, famous sacker of cities," he began, in a hoarse whisper that pierced the surrounding silence. "I see your bad luck has finally brought you to this land of sorrow and night. I am Tiresias, the Theban prophet. Because of my wisdom in life, Persephone has made me the spokesman for my wretched souls of the dead. Stand back from the trench, and let me taste the fresh blood of your sacrifice, and then I'll let you know what to expect on your journey home." I drew back as he asked. The blind ghost knelt down and lowered his face until his lips reached the pool of dark blood. It was a horrifying sight, and when he raised his head, the wet blood glistened on his shadowy lips. "Unluckiest of men," began Tiresias, "you are desperate to return home, yet the god of the sea is determined to prevent you. He wants revenge of his son, Polyphemus, and he's sworn not to give up until you're either dead or safely home in Ithaca. You may eventually get there, but your journey will be perilous. Above all, avoid the island of Thrinacia. Here the sun god Hyphonion's sheep and cattle graze. If any of your men lays a finger on these animals, your ship and your crew will be destroyed by Zeus. As for you, if you reach home, all the way it will be many years later, and you will find many unwelcome guests in your house. Only if you overcome these pretenders to your bed and throne can you look forward to a long life and a happy old age. And remember, beware of Poseidon. He has a long memory." "Wise Tiresias," I replied, "I shall keep your warning close to my heart. But now, please tell me, how can I speak to these other ghosts? There are many things I want to ask them." "All you have to do," he answered, "is let them drink, as I drank from the blood of your sacrifice." Tiresias disappeared into the crowd of ghosts. Now my mother, Antilochia, came forward once more, and I let her drink her fill of the blood. When she raised her head from the dark pool, she recognized me at once. "Odysseus, my dearest child, what has brought you to this place of death and sorrow? Are you still wandering the seas, far from home?" I tried to hug her as she spoke, but my hands went straight through her ghostly outline. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I replied, "Dearest mother, it seems that I am destined to wander the seas forever, far from my home and loved ones. The story of my suffering is already too long to tell you. But what of you? How did you die? How is my family? Has something terrible happened to them too?" "No, no, they're still alive," said my mother, smiling sadly to think of them. "Your father, Laertes, now lives alone in the on his mountain farm, grieving for you. As for Penelope, she's remained loyal all these years, and still longs for you. But it's difficult for her. There's pressure on her to take another husband in your place. The people say that they need a king. Otherwise, she manages things well enough, and Telemachus will soon be old enough to help her. He's already a fine young man, a son you can be proud of." My mother paused while we both thought of our family in Ithaca and cried softly for our lost happiness. Then, still sobbing, my mother spoke through her ghostly tears. "Like your dear father, I was overcome with grief when you didn't return from Troy. Unlike him, I was too frail to endure the disappointment, and I died pining for you, my dearest son. You were my pride and joy, Odysseus, and I couldn't bear this life without you." Again I tried to embrace her, and again she disappeared within my arms. Then she was gone, and Persephone, queen of death, sent forward another shadowy figure in her place. I was shocked to see the sorrowful face of Agamemnon, supreme commander of our Greek forces at Troy, son of Aeetes and brother of Menelaus. When he had drunk the dark blood, he slowly lifted his head. "Odysseus, dear friend, what brings you alive to the grim house of death?" "Great Agamemnon," I replied, "the gods had sent me to this dreadful place to meet the spirits of the dead. But I never expected to find you here. To think that after all those years of war, you were destined not to reach your home." "Oh, I got home all right," groaned Agamemnon, "and I wish I never had. It was no longer my home. We had a following wind all the way from Troy, and got back within days. Clytemnestra, my wife, gave me a hero's welcome and led me and my men to the palace of Agathias, my neighbor, where a great feast had been prepared. We sat down in complete innocence. Seconds later, armed men rushed in and hacked us to pieces where we ate. We didn't have a chance. Our blood ran through the hall, and our bodies were piled high. My treacherous wife, Clytemnestra, laughed in my face as I lay dying. I never even saw my son, Odysseus, before she killed me, and now the two murderers share my throne." When Agamemnon had finished, his unhappy spirit withdrew, weeping, and another dead soul stepped out of the shadows to drink the dark blood. It was Achilles, the finest of our warriors at Troy. He still had the air of a great prince, even as a ghost, but when I told him this, he laughed at me sadly. "Noble Odysseus, you of all my men should have known better to be deceived by appearances. To be great among the dead is to be nothing. In Hades all men are equal. I'd rather be the poorest man alive than walk among the lonely spirits here. But let's not speak of death. Do you have any news of my beloved son, Neoptolemus, who was barely a man when I died on the dusty plains of Troy?" "Yes, I do," I replied, glad to be the messenger of good news for a change. "After your death, I myself went to fetch him from the island of Cyprus. He proved wise beyond his years, and brave in battle, and carried away rich treasures from Troy's smoking ruins." Achilles thanked me from his heart, and faded from his presence, smiling happily at the thought of his son. Now the other spirits approached me and drank the blood. Some I knew, others were unfamiliar faces from the distant past. Then Persephone herself appeared and led me through the crowded entrance into the underworld itself. The touch of her cold hand chilled my blood as we walked deeply into the cavern of endless emptiness. I saw Tityus and Tantalus, Sisyphus and Hercules, and many others condemned to suffer torment until the end of time. It was not long before the sight of souls in agony and the din of hideous screams became unbearable. I begged Persephone to let me go, terrified that she would keep me alive in this hell. Somehow I found myself back outside. Now I was completely alone. There were no ghosts, and my companions had also disappeared. I ran back past the tall black poplars and through the groves of blighted willows. My heart was pounding, and my mind was numb with fear. Perhaps my men had already sailed away from the shores of Hades, thinking that I was lost to the world of living. I would be left to wander alone in the half-light of this miserable place until my death. But the ship was still there. My men had waited. I had waded through the freezing black water of ocean, and 12 arms reached down to the haul to haul me over the side of the boat. They immediately set sail and pulled in the anchor. With the wind behind us, my men rowing furiously, the shores of Hades were already fading in the distance by the time I had recovered my breath.